you all this afternoon, as it is for me. Just by way of introduction, I am a theologian by training, and I feel very much of a novice entering this area of digital theology. So do forgive any imfelicities of language. We heard in the last panel a little bit about some of the precision that we're trying to add to this, and I wish I'd had that before I'd written my paper, but never mind, we're here now, and I hope to be able to add precision afterwards. The paper that you may have read derives from a number of personal experiences that led me to this point. Firstly, a set of positive experiences of using digital technology to create and curate postgraduate theological learning environments. This was all pre-COVID, but it was still on Zoom. It enabled us to gather, in the context I was in Cambridge, a global set of theological students together to study theology at a postgraduate level. And it led to some interesting interactions that highlighted to me the possibilities of decolonizing theological education using digitality. The second set of experiences was an unexpected series of events that led to my present role at Cliff College, which is a Methodist training college in the UK, where I'm on the one hand responsible for delivering theological education to residential students, and on the other hand responsible for developing a learning management system, an LMS, not just for our own students, but for our global partners as well. And the experiences that I've had in developing this new LMS, which is a theological kind of customization of the Open edX LMS system, has led to some of the thoughts that are in the paper that is in front of you. A lot of it comes out of an observation that the use of digitality in churches and theological colleges is often seen as something of a saviour, a way of making up for small recruitment figures and dwindling engagement in the wider culture. And I essentially in my paper want to challenge this idea of seeing digitality as a saviour of the old way of doing theological college education and as a precursor to perhaps a new model. So what I particularly bring in my paper are, I think, three things, which I'll briefly talk about here and summarise here, and you can read more about in the paper. The first is some thinking around the learning neighbourhood. The second is some thinking around the gift of disruption. And the third is some thinking about decoloniality and intercontextuality. So firstly, something about the learning neighbourhood. This is a phrase that I picked up from an article written by Claire Annalise Smith in a book that was published called Proleptic Pedagogy. They were doing a little bit of a study at St. Paul's School of Theology, which is another Methodist institution in Kansas. And in her paper, as they were exploring the kind of pedagogies they were developing, she used this phrase, learning neighbourhood. And it's one of those phrases that kind of grabs you. It's only used once, but it kind of brings you into this world of imagination. And I suddenly realized that a learning neighbourhood could be something really interesting to explore as a theological college. A neighbourhood, the neighbourhoods that we live in, are not homogeneous. Indeed, neighbourhoods are interesting insofar as they have porous boundaries and they name a set of varying intersections. So in our neighbourhoods, we have all sorts of people who make up the neighbourhoods in which we live, and people have different levels of engagement in that neighbourhood. For theological education, and perhaps for the theological college in particular, I think this is an enormously provocative and productive idea to think of ourselves as a learning neighbourhood. The learning neighbourhood is not just the classroom, but the whole campus. And indeed, perhaps not just the whole campus, but the context in which we exist. So one of the things that I've tried to say in my paper is the way in which we might look at the learning neighbourhood as a generative and generous space where we offer hospitality to many people who would be outside the classroom, but who nevertheless have something to say in our theological education. This generosity is rooted in the hospitality of God, and is a deep and profound statement about the source of theological knowledge, which can't be proscribed in advance. If we are taking seriously the incarnation, that God is in our neighbourhood, we must take seriously the lived-in context as the place of theological discovery and discussion. This leads me to the idea of the gift of disruption. We need to, I think, re-envisage the Theological College away from being an oasis of retreat and learning, which is often the kind of ideal that many people have, towards being a learning neighbourhood where disruptions are seen as the provocations of divine hospitality and vocational learning. So these disruptions are not kind of taking us off course, but actually divine encounters, angels unawares, that actually lead us to the presence of God. And this kind of disruption in our theological college life moves us away from, I suggest, being merely tribal. So often theological colleges are quite tribal in the sense of guarding and patrolling their boundaries quite carefully. The gift of disruption, and of digital disruption in particular, in the way it disrupts the rhythm of our theological college, it disrupts the kind of way in which we order our learning and our formational and our worship in life, I think helps us stop being tribal and be more hospitable towards those folk to whom God is calling us. And this leads me finally toward the idea of decoloniality in the Theological College, turning us, I think, from broadcast mode, which is the mode that we so often exist in, into the mode of the seminar room. And the idea of intercontextuality in the seminar room is really important to me, because it's one of the ways I think that we can add this idea of decoloniality, which is so important. Jose Medina, in some studies in discourse studies, I think introduces this idea of intercontextuality really well, recognizing that my here, the place where I am, is always someone else's elsewhere. My here is always someone else's elsewhere. And in intercontextual discourse, we all become aware that each of our locations is always a somewhere else for someone else. I think that kind of idea is enormously productive. I think it's really hard to keep that intercontextuality when we're all physically in the same location. But this is something I think that digitality can really push us into, enabling us to bring our various contexts, various locations into the one space. And so this all, I think, leads us to re-envision the Theological College, so that we're not simply in the Theological College doing learning for the margins. That's something that was perhaps the old model. Nor are we merely doing theological learning at the margins. This is where we recognise the different contexts of our students, but we are seeking to push beyond that into learning with the margins and bringing the richness of if you like, the peripheries of theological college life into the very heart of our learning experience, the heart of our learning neighbourhood. So personally, in my work, I felt that this is a key possibility of developing our own LMS, our own learning management system that uses technology and that shares a learning environment with lots of our global partners in order to bring those experiences together in a hopefully digitally engaging way. And I'm eager to keep on developing this vision, ethos, and the particular technologies to enable this as I move forward in my role. And this paper is the beginnings of my exploration of that. And I look forward to Calvin's response and to our conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Calvin?
Thank you. I'm going to share slides. I'll do the introduction in a moment, but this is Andrew's topic, disrupting. Sorry, let me get rid of faces so I don't have to look at anybody. So this is the topic, Andrew's topic, which is disrupting the learning neighborhood, digitality, decolonization, and the future of Theological College. And this is my response just by way of, oops. Oh, just give me a moment. Yeah. Just by way of introduction, I am Calvin, and I teach in Singapore Bible College. And interestingly, I did my PhD actually in learning interactions many, many years ago. So this is actually something that is very close to my heart. I read Andrew's paper with great interest. And I would just say that, because of time, let me just leave my favorite quotes, which are: the gift of digitality to the Theological College is to extend its hospitality and to expand its neighborhood. The second quotation, and that's probably the only other one I'm going to leave with us, is: intercontextuality is one of the greatest disruptive gifts of digitality, digitally mediated theological learning. And basically, the way I see what Andrew is saying is that, there are, we have come to a situation where we are actually thinking more seriously about the digital pathways, the platforms, and the persons that we want to connect with beyond our immediate neighborhood. And so we have, new frontiers, and really what we are doing, or at least this paper is proposing, is that we have this invitation for other people to come into our neighborhood, or maybe possibly even, and I'm not very clear on this, Andrew, maybe you can help me, whether it's for us to go into other people's neighborhood. And, that's a point of clarification I would like to have from you. But why is this not moving now? I thought I would like to explore, or try to explain it more in terms of, or explain how I think about this in terms of the host idea. And we have the learner coming into your community, and what we want to do is to offer a relational, generous, hospitable space. What we want to have is develop the intercontextual ethos. And within that ethos, we want to have that transformative experience. Really, that's basically summarizing what Andrew is saying in his paper. And by way of response, I thought I would examine the paper's thesis, but from the end user point of view. So I'm thinking it from a different angle. And I just wanted to point out to the fact that, because we are talking about digital era, that the characteristics of particularly our younger users, they would be discerning consumers of media. They have digital competency, certainly, and perhaps even some wisdom. The aesthetic excellence is a given. They communicate multimodally with all the communication modalities that are available to them. There's a very strong global outlook, highly connected and networked, cyber-social, gamer intuitions, divergent thinkers, multi-perspectival and hence exploratory of different perspectives, creative problem solvers, and just for good measure, they also have chatty fingers. That one comes for free, no extra charge. Now, I also thought about the other point about, just kind of extending Andrew's idea, because, just as one institution is attempting that, I would imagine that, around the world, that there are many, many institutions that are probably thinking the same. And I'm just wondering whether, because of our global outlook in some of our institutions, simply because, a place like Singapore, for example, we are so small, we have no time to look inward, we're always looking outward. And hence, we are already highly intercontextual, possibly highly hospitable and warm. And we have a crisis because everybody is inviting the end user into the institution. So the point is, what makes your institution or my institution special that I would want to enter into? So I'm thinking of it more from an end user point of view, okay? And so my contention is that the concepts of hospitality, relationality, and intercontextuality that is presented in the paper are necessary conditions for transformative theological education. But that could happen in geographic learning spaces and neighborhoods. It doesn't have to be digital, okay? And so I'm making the point that while they are necessary, they may not be sufficient when engaging digital natives in digital spaces. And I want to draw attention to the Liebig's minimal, which talks about, the amount of water that you can hold in the barrel is dependent on the shortest stave, not the longest. And so if you're very strong in hospitality, etc., then that is our long stave. But are there any other elements within the institution that we need to develop in order for us to hold more water, as it were, to offer a better learning experience? And so that is really my question that I want to pose, that while we have these, while we are developing these characteristics, are there other things in the learner experience that would be missing? Bearing in mind that the capital and the currency in digital neighborhoods is built on these R's that you have over here: resonance, ratings, and recommendations, and reviews, and reputation, and reciprocity, and requests, and responsiveness to requests. So, we have that situation. And from an end user point of view, the question is, why would I want to go to your school, right? Why would I want to hang out in your neighborhood when there are other more interesting neighborhoods that could be which are on tap and on offer? And that's really a question that all institutions have to ask for themselves. And I'm saying that, to develop, it all takes time and it takes work. It doesn't happen overnight. So I leave the question, how do we create a digital learning neighborhood that is vibrant and thriving? And I think to answer that question, I want to draw inspiration and lessons from urban planning, placemaking, and design thinking circles, because here we are talking about neighborhoods. I mean, Andrew, you've introduced the idea of neighborhood. And I want to draw attention to this particular idea of the power of 10. And the essential the thesis is behind this, that places thrive when
this will have to be your last point.
Oh, okay. Okay, so places thrive when there are 10 reasons for people to want to go there, okay? And this is just a picture of it. And so I'm asking, what's the equivalent? And I'm drawing inspiration from this particular person, Professor Mata, in this book. You can scan the QR code if you want to, but essentially, he's saying that interactivity is a very critical thing. And if you look at the literature in his summary, he talked about learner, learner self, learner content, learner instructor, learner expert, learner others, learner environment, learner interface, and learning tools. Now, all those interactions do happen. And I'm saying that, and there's also the vicarious interaction. I'm saying that most institutions focus on what you see over there. Andrew has really extended that, and I'm really grateful to what he's saying. But in my experience working in the digital space, what really is of interest to the digital generation is the interaction with the environment and the interface and the digital tools. And so what I'm saying is that we really need to pay attention to these factors, the tools, the interface, etc., because we promote relationality, we express hospitality, we foster intercontextuality when we pay attention to these. When we don't pay attention to that, we actually deprive our guests from hospitality, because I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but I use Moodle in Singapore Bible College, and I find that painfully primitive. If I were a digital native going to that space, I would find it very, very painful and certainly not hospitable. So I leave these thoughts with you, and thank you so much for allowing me this response.
Thank you. And Andrew, we'll give you time to respond once we've heard both papers. So Daniela.